Hello, everyone. I know we have some folks still trickling in, so I'll just wait just a few more seconds and I'll go ahead and get us started. Nice to see a few familiar faces. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here. Good morning, good afternoon, and perhaps good evening to some of our participants from around the world. My name is Eden Alvarez-Backus, and it is my pleasure to kick this morning's expeditions off. So we are going to start our day by having a conversation around compassion. And more specifically, the topic of this expedition is exploring wise compassion, how to do things in a hard way. And to take us through this conversation, we have Jacqueline Carter and Shannon Jordan joining us from the Potential Project. Jacqueline is the co-founder of Potential Project. She is also the partner and North American director. Jacqueline's got an extensive background in leadership development, and she has spent just the bulk of her career working with numerous large organizations to help them understand how they can develop their leaders, with a particular focus on the mindset component of leadership development. She is widely known for spending her time working with organizations to really help them leverage and bring out the potential of their leaders so that they can be more effective leaders, they can be more resilient leaders, and that they can be more creative leaders. And doing that all through helping them understand how to manage their mindsets and their minds. She's worked with a variety of large organizations like Cisco and Disney, Accenture, IKEA, and the list goes on and on. Jacqueline is also joined today by her colleague, Shannon Jordan, who is a senior consultant with Potential Project. Shannon is a certified executive coach. She's facilitated many large-scale workshops, and she works as a leadership consultant also with organizations in understanding how to improve the development, the performance, the effectiveness of their leaders. The topic that they're going to be sharing with us today in depth is around wise compassion. And we all know that leadership, particularly leadership in today's day and age and in today's environment, is really very tricky, very difficult, very not easy. And with those leadership responsibilities comes the need to make some really tough decisions, some really tough calls that can actually have negative impacts on people's lives and professions. And so how do we have those tough conversations, but do so in a human way? And that's what we're going to explore in today's expedition. As we go through this expedition, let me plant a couple of seeds in your mind as you listen to and engage with Jacqueline and Shannon. Consider, what are some of the hardest things you have had to do as a leader? What did you learn from that experience in terms of doing hard things in a human way? What benefits might wise compassion bring to those that we lead and to ourselves as leaders? And then finally, if you've been through situations where you have had to make these hard decisions, which I'm sure every single one of us has been in, what strategies or tips might you share for doing hard things in a human way? So those are some of the questions that we're going to be exploring over the course of the next hour or so. I'm going to invite you to put questions in the chat room. Jacqueline and I have talked about me raising them as they come. We don't want you to forget those questions or those comments, so certainly put them in the chat room, and then we will also reserve some time towards the end to have a more full debrief and conversation. So on that note, Jacqueline, Shannon, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Eden, thank you so much for that very, very, very warm welcome, and welcome everyone. It is so lovely to be able to see all of you here and see the interest that you have in this topic of wise compassion. Today, we really want to take you on a journey, and that journey is into the mind, and specifically looking at how sometimes our mind gets in the way of us being able to show up and be the best leaders that we need to be in being able to, as Eden talked about, doing hard things in a human way. But our ultimate goal today is we really want to make sure that we make good use of your time. So our measuring stick for the success of today's session is we're hoping that you walk away with at least one tip or one tool or one technique, something that after the session today, you can walk away and practically apply in your leadership. Now, the other aspect of that is, of course, we're hoping that you might get that one tip, that one tool, that one technique for us. But we also recognize that all of you have so much experience. And as Eden shared, we hope you're thinking about your tips or things. So we're really also hoping to make this session interactive so that we can really create an opportunity for us to learn from each other. Is that okay? Or do you guys just want us to lecture? Or are you good? You're good to make this interactive? Okay, because we can lecture, we just don't like it. So it's good to be able to make this interactive. Okay, that's fantastic. So then maybe just to start off on that note, to just get to know each other better, the first thing that we'd like to know is what inspired you to join this session? And maybe if you could just share in chat, just what are you hoping to get out of this session? What inspired you to be here today and to commit the time? And just give you a few moments to just share with us in chat so that we can just get a sense of how we might be of best service to all of you. And if some of you don't like typing and you want to just speak up, that would also be great. So if anybody just wants to share so we can hear some other voices right off the bat, that would also be wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Alejandro. Wonderful. Nice. All right, love the buzzword. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. We'll talk about, yeah, that's absolutely true. Thank you. Would anybody like to share just a little bit more? Is anybody we're going to talk about courage today. Would anybody, at least one person, like to share so we can hear another voice in the room?
Hey, Alejandro here. Good morning.
Hello.
I think compassion is something I personally would love to see more often. And some cultures, and I think I'm living today in a culture actually leans positive on this. Consider compassion or show compassion as a weakness, right? You need to be tough.
Yeah.
And the art here is how to be able to be strong,
yeah,
but in just the right way. And I've been in places where it's, somebody used the word egregious, right?
Yeah.
It's, some people believe it's expected not to be compassionate.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to join here, to really hear your experiences. But thank you for opening the floor.
Alejandro, thank you. And thank you for sharing that. And that is one of the things that we will really unpack today, is really looking at, I think oftentimes leaders have this assumption that we have to do hard things or we have to be human, and they're separate things. We can either care about our people or we can give them the tough feedback. And what we really are seeing in our research and also in our conversations with leaders is that there is an intersection. And in fact, when we're able to bring together the hard and the human, it's actually when we can show up as the best version of ourselves and also create the best impact on our team. But thank you for sharing, because that's, you articulated the exact nut of what we want to try to crack today. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for sharing in the chat. It's so helpful to be able to have that. And maybe we'll just dive in, and again, keep your questions coming. And we really want to, as I said, make this interactive, and we'll hopefully be able to give you lots of opportunities to be able to chime in. But to give you a little bit of context, we'll start with how we see our journey together today. We will give you some context on compassion and leadership, and we'll start with some definitions, because we know that we have people from all over the world and definitions will be helpful. We're going to provide you with a framework for wise compassion, and then we'll look at how to bring wise compassion into action. And then we'll do a summary, and as Eden said, we'll make sure that we have some time at the end for Q&A. But to get started, just to give you a sense of who we are. So as Eden mentioned, we're a potential project. We are a global organization. We do this work with leaders and teams And we do also consult to organizations to be able to support them in the journey of being able to help them realize more of their potential through understanding the mind. Our specific purpose is to create a more human world of work by harnessing the full potential of the mind. And the context for today's session is really the research that we've done over the last 3 years. We interviewed over 350 executives from many of our clients, the organizations that you see on the side. We've collected a ton of data. We've also we partnered with Harvard Business Review as well as Forbes to really be able to get a really comprehensive data set. And we also have a number of academic partners that you can see. And just to give you a sense of that research in terms of, and it was really great the way Eden set things up, especially with those interviews. One of the things that we did when we sat down, and it was often with CEOs or CHROs, and we said to them, the first question was, what was the hardest thing that you ever had to do and tried to do in a human way? And that just opened up such wonderful dialogue, such inspiring stories. There were tears in terms of challenges that leaders have faced. And I think that one of the things that we really wanted to get to as we start this journey today and talk about this is if it were easy for us to be able to just figure out how to do this, we wouldn't have to have this research. We wouldn't be having sessions like this. And one of the things that we really found from all of the leaders that we spoke with is by having conversations about the challenges and continuing to learn and to learn from each other is actually the most powerful way for us to get better at doing these things, because they are in fact hard. So to give you kind of a landscape of definitions, because as I said, we're all from maybe different cultures, different countries even, to be able to help us really look at how we define compassion and really looking at it in terms of landscape of compassion. Comparing on the one side our willingness to act, so how willing are we to do something and take action? And on the other spectrum, looking at our ability to actually understand another person's experience. And to start out with, just again for definitions, we can look at when we talk about pity, it's really kind of in the lowest quadrant, the lowest corner of this, where we really have very little willingness to act and very little understanding of the other person's experience. Moving up from there, we can get to a place of sympathy, which is really, I feel for you. So more understanding of the other person's experience, but still maybe limited willingness to act. When we get into empathy, and this is something that we'll really look to unpack a little bit today, is that empathy is an absolute beautiful experience of really connecting with another person's experience. So it's that ability to, I feel with you. The challenge though, and we'll talk about this, is that it doesn't always necessarily translate in our ability to act in the way that can be the most beneficial for the individual or for us as a leader or for the organization. And that's why when we talk about compassion, we're really looking at the ability to move up this chain, a real understanding of the other person's experience, but a real ability to say, I am here to help, and an ability to focus on the bigger picture, the bigger perspective of what's going to be the most benefit. How can I be of best service? And the reason why this is so important is that from a leadership perspective, if we look at the difference between empathy and compassion, we can think of an example, like think of, and you've probably all been in this scenario, I know you're all leaders, you have an employee that is feeling completely overwhelmed. It's probably not paper, it's probably their inbox that is overflowing with so many things to do, back-to-back meetings, and you know that they're really struggling. An experience of empathy is really being able to share that suffering, say, I've been there, I know, it feels overwhelming, that's really tough. Whereas an experience of compassion is really the ability to say, how can I alleviate that suffering? Empathy, we can look at as an emotion, whereas compassion is more of an intention. And this gets into, it's really quite important to be able to understand these, because from a neurological perspective, so looking at the science behind this, the science of the mind, where empathy shows up in the brain is actually different than where compassion shows up in the brain. And you can see in the image that we're looking at here, because empathy is an emotion, it really is activated in our ability to connect with other human beings from an emotional perspective. We actually can feel their pain, feel their suffering. And that is activated in a part of the brain, which is beautiful, where we're able to connect with other human beings. When we look at compassion, we're really shifting more into the prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning part of our brain, where we can, as I said, look at the big picture, look at what's going to actually be, how can I be of best service? And in that case, we're actually activating a different part of our brain where we can have that ability to focus and be able to look at how can I actually support this person? And the reason why this is so important is that what the research shows is that empathy, although it's a wonderful quality to have and very important for us to be able to connect with other human beings, it does actually have some limitations. We can actually get so caught up in empathy that we can get distressed ourselves, or we can experience a sense of burnout. And many people over the last 18 months have experienced that. There's just, even if they themselves are not struggling, they're taking on the suffering of their teams or their colleagues or people in their families or in their communities. The other thing about empathy that can be challenging is that what the research shows, it can lead to fleeting activities. So it's a spark of empathy that leads me to go do something, but I'm not necessarily thinking about strategically what my action should be. The other thing that the research shows, and I think right now in terms of how critically important it is for all of us to look at how we're navigating from a diversity and equity inclusion perspective, what we know is that we empathize more with people that look like us versus people that don't. And so it's much easier for us to not recognize the suffering or the challenges for other people because they're simply different than us. It can also make us narrow-minded, and it can actually lead to poor moral decisions. There was a really interesting research study, just to give you a sense of what this can look like, where a group of doctors were given a list, a prioritized list of children that needed to have surgery, and they were told that this list has been evaluated by experts, and this is the correct order in terms of who should get the surgery first versus who should get the surgery second, third, fourth, and so on. But what they did to these clinicians, again, physicians, experts, is they told them a story of the boy who was number 6, and they showed him pictures of the boy and of his family and of the challenges. And after they shared with these physicians this image of this child that was number 6, they asked whether or not they thought that that child should be moved up on the list. And the majority of the physicians actually said yes. They thought that that child should be moved up, and they questioned the judgment of the experts that had created the list. And so essentially, that's just an example of how sometimes empathy, as beautiful as it is, it can create challenges for us. So that's why what we really want to help us to be able to navigate more towards is this experience of compassion. We know, again, from a research perspective, when we can bring more compassion into our leadership, we can create greater empowerment, we can create more of a sense of control, we can create sustainable actions, better social connections, and ultimately be able to support a more genuine sense of happiness. Now I'll just pause there to just see whether anybody has any questions, because this landscape of empathy versus compassion is really important for us to understand before we go forward. Does this make sense to people? Any questions that people want to ask?
Jacqueline, can I just share a comment that I saw in the chat, and it comes from Simon, and he talks about compassion fatigue. And I see words similar to that on this screen here. And I'm just wondering, when we feel this sense of fatigue, is it the compassion fatigue or is it the empathy fatigue?
Yeah, it's great. And Eden, thank you so much. And Simon, thank you for raising that. More than likely, that would actually be, sometimes people, again, use these terms to mean the same things, even though neurologically they are quite different. So normally if people talk about compassion fatigue, it's probably an experience of empathy that they're feeling. Any other?
One more question, Jacqueline, does empathy always need to come before compassion?
That is a great question. And the answer is no, it doesn't. It helps, and I'll show that in just a moment, but it doesn't always need to. It's a great question. And actually, just maybe along those lines, unless Eden, is there anything else that's coming up? But maybe just if people, again, make this interactive, thumbs up, because again, definitions are important, because we're actually going to take you into a journey of being able to experience the difference. And so it's really important that we understand the landscape that we're looking at. So thumbs up, this is making sense? Yes, good. All right, thank you. So just again, looking at this to be able to how we can actually connect with empathy, but really from a leadership perspective, take that into a ability to be able to act. And this is really interesting. You know, we do oftentimes, and this is again something that's so human for us, is to be able to capitalize on that spark of empathy, that ability for us to recognize when other people are struggling. But it can lead to emotional empathy, and it can actually lead to something from a neurological perspective, which is called empathetic hijack. We actually can't think straight. We can't process any more information because we're so caught up in the suffering of other people. And that is what can lead to compassion fatigue or empathetic burnout. But that experience of just being overwhelmed, I can't do anything more because I'm just so struggling with all the suffering or challenges that I'm seeing from other people. Ideally, what we want to be able to do is to move from that spark of empathy into rational empathy, which is really then the next step towards compassion, so that we can take that compassion and turn that into action. And so that's really what we're trying to do. And it's such an interesting question that you asked. Do we always need to have that spark of empathy, especially as leaders, when we're responsible not just for one person, but for a whole team, or as senior leaders responsible for that whole organization? Oftentimes as leaders, we don't necessarily need to have that spark of empathy. We do need to have the ability to recognize the challenges that people are facing, but we can actually make that jump right to compassion. So that's giving us the landscape. But what we wanted to do today is actually give you the opportunity to go to that journey into the mind to actually experience the difference of empathy and compassion. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Shannon to take you there.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. So as Jacqueline mentioned, in the spirit of the expedition, we just want to invite you into an experience. And this exercise is really designed to help you feel this difference that Jacqueline's describing between empathy and compassion. And just a little bit of a disclaimer, because you may be experiencing some empathy here, you might at times feel some uncomfortable emotions. But not to worry, this is just simply a sign that you're a good person who cares for others. So everyone game to join me? Okay, I see some nods. All right, so let's start with just putting anything aside that we may not need. If you're taking notes, just put your pen down. And start by taking a posture that allows you to be both comfortable and alert, and feeling the feet flat on the floor. Straightening the back, maybe even sitting up a little bit straighter in the chair. And then gently softening the neck, the shoulders, the arms. And allowing the eyes to close if that's comfortable for you, or you can just look with a downward gaze or at a fixed point on the wall. This just helps us go into our inner experience and shut out all of the distractions of the outside world. And for a few moments, let's just bring mindful attention to the body and allow our awareness to go within. Most of the time, our awareness lives in our heads, right? Planning, strategizing, remembering. This is your opportunity to let go of all that mental activity and simply connect with the sensations of just sitting here and breathing. Grounding into the points of contact the body's making with the chair or the floor. And just beginning to notice the movement of the body with the in-breath and the out-breath. And as you're beginning to notice the breath, you may notice other sensations in the body. If you've been working already for a few hours today, there might be some tightness or tension. Just notice that and release it to the best you can on the out breath. And now, wherever you feel the breath most vividly in the body, just letting your attention settle there. Maybe you sense the rise and the fall of the abdomen, or the sensation of the breath at the entrance of the nose, or maybe the flow of the breath throughout the entire body. And if thoughts still persist or you find your attention has wandered, just simply redirect attention back to the breath, giving the body and the mind a chance to come into stillness. And now, with the eyes still closed, I'd like to invite you to join me in a visualization. I'd like you to bring to mind a person close to you, someone you care about. This could be a family member, it could be a coworker or a colleague, but someone who's had a lot of challenges lately. It can be physical or mental pain, some sort of difficulty, challenge, or suffering in their lives. And I want to invite you to imagine this person in front of you. And just notice how this suffering is showing up on his or her face and body posture. And for a few moments, allow yourself to sit with the challenges and the suffering that this other person is feeling. And if you feel some heaviness or some sadness here, that's okay. This is empathy. And we can celebrate this uniquely human ability to put ourselves in another person's shoes, to feel what they might be feeling. You're taking on the suffering of someone you care about. And I want to invite you to specifically notice what sensations you feel in the body. Is there a heaviness at the heart or a sinking feeling in the stomach? Just notice where you feel this spark of empathy. And if at any time it seems too much, you can always come back to the sensations of the breath. And if you can't feel any physical sensations, that's okay too. Maybe for you, empathy is showing up as a thought or a concern about what this person is going through. Just notice your experience in the body and the mind. And now I want to invite you to try this shift from empathy to compassion. So almost as if you were taking a mental step away from this person, bring some perspective, zoom out a bit to the experience and ask yourself, what small action could I do to help this person feel better, to benefit this person? Could it be a conversation, a text message, a walk, maybe an anonymous gesture of some kind? And commit to yourself within the next week. You'll do this one small thing to help the person feel better, even if it seems insignificant. And in your mind's eye, imagine this person persevering through whatever suffering they're experiencing. And notice if you feel any physical sensations as you hold this person's growth and well-being in your heart and your mind. If you notice a sense of empowerment or a feeling of strength as you reflect on your commitment to do this one small thing to help this person's situation to improve, this is compassion. And if you can't feel this shift, that's okay too. We're training the mind to tune into the subtle differences between empathy and compassion here. And sometimes this can take some practice. So finally, I invite you to let go of the image of the person by just sending them an intention. May you be happy. May you be free of your challenges. May you be at ease. May you be happy. May you be free of your challenges. May you be at ease. And then for a few moments, let's just sit with the breath. Just once again, noticing the physical sensations of the breath moving through the body. Noticing how you feel after experiencing empathy and compassion. And when you're ready, I'll invite you to open your eyes. And we'll bring our attention back to each other. So let me just invite you to input into the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute and just share what your experience was with that shift. What did you notice? What did you notice in the empathy? What did you notice in the compassion? How was that for you? And you don't need to go into details about the person in your mind's eye, but rather just your experience.
Sure.
David, hi.
Sure. I was my 18-year-old son Joshua had his first breakup with a girlfriend at college. So I've been deeply concerned about him, and when I shifted, the weight of that concern felt a lot lighter, and the action kind of created some air for me.
Yeah, thank you, David. And can I ask you, when you mentioned the word concern, where did you feel that? How did that show up for you initially? Was there a physical sensation connected with that?
Yeah, I try to overthink things. So it starts out here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But
Can't
it sounds
solve
like you felt that shift where it felt a little lighter. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
That was valuable. Thank you.
And Kara, you noticed as well that you felt a bit lighter, less responsible to solve the problem. Is there anything more you'd like to say about that?
Yes, it's interesting because I work as a coach. So in my professional life, I listen and I don't rescue. And the person I brought to mind was my partner, who's having some challenges at work. And I find that whenever he talks to me about them, because I feel his pain, I go straight to rescue mode and offer solutions. And what I've realized is I need to listen to him and let him reach his own solution. So that will empower him. It will be better for him. I know that because I'm a coach, and I know it's better when people come up with their own solutions. So that's why I feel
Yes.
lighter and less responsible.
Yes, absolutely, Kara. Thank you so much for sharing. And that's such a good point, because sometimes there's not actually much that we can do. All we can do is hope and aspire that this person is able to solve this on their own. Yeah. And Ariel, thank you. You're mentioning that you felt compassion in the heart when you shifted. There was an energy shift for you. Yeah. Thank you. And Mark, yeah, do you want to say more about that? About the action that felt a little uncomfortable?
Well, what I would say is it feels like you go from empathy to, oh, I know what to do. And then this sort of braking system hits and you go, oh, no, that's not, you shouldn't do anything. Don't be intrusive. Don't be over controlling. And, don't overdo this. That's kind of what kept popping into my head. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that, Mark.
Am I in the camera? Yeah. Yeah.
I think sometimes, Mark, just the action could be a question, or the action could be a sharing that I'd really love to be able to help you, but I don't want to be intrusive. So the action, and I think just a number of you mentioned that the action doesn't always have to be feeling responsible to solve. Sometimes you can't solve their problems, but you can sometimes, Kara, as you said, give them space, which may be exactly what they need, as hard as that can be. And sometimes just letting them know you're thinking of them, which is extremely powerful in and of itself.
Yeah.
We're sharing an observation about the importance of focusing on one thing, not a million things that you can do to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you all for sharing. Thank you for diving into that journey. What we wanted to do now was to actually provide you with a little bit of a framework, a landscape of wise compassion, which hopefully we're hoping will be helpful as you continue to explore this journey of how to be able to bring this more into action. And so to do that, what we'll look at is what we call the matrix of wise compassion. And what you can see here is on the vertical, we have the difference between compassion versus indifference. And on the horizontal, we have on the one extreme, wisdom, being able to do the right things, especially as leaders, versus ignorance. And when we look at this matrix, and this is one of the things that we really found in our research, is that all of us can end up in all of these quadrants. I know none of us, I would never like to think that I'm in ineffective indifference, but we can all end up in any one of these quadrants, depending on the situation, depending on the person, or depending on our own mental state. And so just to be able to walk around a little bit to navigate us, and again, hopefully sharing this tool to see if it might be helpful for you. But in that quadrant 1, caring avoidance, is really when we let empathy be a barrier to action. And what that can look like is that there's somebody who we know that we need to give feedback to, but we know that they're having a really difficult time. And so we care too much, so we don't want to give them the feedback that we really know that they need, even though it's not only negatively impacting them, but it's negatively impacting the team. And so that can put us, for all kinds of good reasons, into quadrant 1, caring avoidance. We can also end up in ineffective indifference. And oftentimes the reason why we'll end up there is because we're busy, we're overwhelmed, we miss things, we are not paying attention, or sometimes it's just because of our own inherent biases. We are just simply not understanding what the experience is for other people. And we let our biases get in the way of our ability to be able to ask more questions and be more curious, to see how we really might be able to be of benefit to other people. We can also end up in quadrant 4, and this really gets, Alejandro, what you were talking about is we might think that being a leader is just getting the job done. I need to let this person go and I'm just going to go in and I'm going to do the job. And that's what being a leader is all about. and we put the results or the outcomes before people's well-being. And that can have us end up in uncaring execution. So the idea of this is to really look at how we can actually be more in quadrant 2, how we can make sure that we do the hard things that we need to do as leaders, but do them in a compassionate way. And I'll just pause there. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually go into some strategies for what we can do in quadrant 2. But before I do that, again, I just wanted to pause and see, does this framework, does this make sense? Is this helpful to people? And does anybody have any questions about it?
It does. I have one question. This is really great. So often in conversations like this, we seem to be framing about situations where, you know, as leaders or managers, people are experiencing something which is affecting their performance in a sense. That's the trigger.
Yeah.
That's obviously a situation that we and our people often find themselves dealing with. But I'm really curious about the positive context. You know, not the context where we're noticing people who are struggling with something and it may be affecting their performance, but actually how to create a compassionate organization where that's actually also manifest in a positive sense, not just in addressing something which is perceived as a negative.
Absolutely. And so, Peter, I don't know if this would be an example of that, but absolutely, like when we look at being more in quadrant 2, you know, it might be actually an opportunity that we recognize somebody is challenging. We recognize that they're having some performance issues, and we talk about that in a compassionate way so that we can actually bring that to the table and empower them to be able to address those issues. And so looking at it not from a negative perspective, but looking at it in terms of taking action. But I'm not sure if I'm getting your question right. Peter, do you want to give another?
Yeah, so that was one half. I think the other half is, in my mind, is, you know, how to develop a culture of compassion, which isn't about helping people with problems, but just helping people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is a lot of what we talk about in terms of, and I think the reason why we focus maybe on the difficulties is that in general, our experience is most people are kind to each other. I mean, that is, you know, most of the organizations, most people don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to have a really bad day and really be offensive to all of my colleagues. I don't know many people like that. And so I think that's why, in general, we find that most organizations, most individuals do bring a lot of care and kindness and consideration for their colleagues. What we find, though, is where it gets challenging is when they have to do something difficult. So that's why we really focus on that. But I totally agree with you. I mean, it is so important to be able to bring this into the culture at all times. Shannon, I don't know, or Eden, if you want to jump in, anything else there that would be helpful for what?
Well, if I could just, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Peter, please.
I was just going to sort of put it in the current context, something which probably we're all grappling with, you know, how we return our organizations in this transition out of COVID, we hope. And so, you know, we're not dealing with people who have performance issues, for example, but we're still trying to figure out, you know, beyond empathy, you know, how to actually rationally be able to think differently, you know, about how we're going to organize our teams and entire organizations.
Exactly. Absolutely. Eden?
One of the things that comes to my mind, Peter, because we are grappling with this specific scenario that you've described right now within my own organization, I think sometimes we presume and assume to understand how people are going to react to the need to come back to the office. And we don't ask, we don't question, we don't have these conversations to really help us understand the different ways that people might be experiencing the return to the office, good or bad, hard or easy. And for me, one of the strategies there is just to make sure that my own biases, my own assumptions about coming back to the office is everybody's experience of coming back to the office. And from there, if I could understand what the myriad of experiences will be, that then enables me to think about how to position this differently, how to talk about this differently in a way that seems, I think, more caring and more compassionate. That's how I'm sort of trying to translate this notion of compassion to the very specific situation of coming back to work, coming back to the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Can I jump in and add to Eden's? I think that comes from a place of listening rather than assuming,
Exactly.
which fits in with those words ignorance and wisdom, because making the wrong assumptions is ignorance and listening is wisdom.
Yeah.
Seeking to or being curious.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that's exactly it. And it's, you know, ignorance, and it is one of the things in our research, we found that people had a tough time with it because, again, nobody wants to be labeled as ignorant, but you're absolutely right. We all are if we're not curious and we make assumptions and we don't ask enough questions. And so that really is what enables us to be able to move across that spectrum when we seek to understand as opposed to assuming that we know. And that's another way for us to be able to move along the spectrum and then to be able to bring ourselves into the quadrant 2.
David had made a comment in the chat here, Jacqueline, around preventing our own stories from getting in the way. You know, how do I understand the other person's goals or aspirations or needs versus my own? I think that's a little bit of a, there seems to be a little bit of a theme to that in some of the commentary. It's about the person, it's not about me.
Yeah, exactly. And recognizing, you know, how challenging that is. I mean, we all have a perception that what's happening right now is real, but the reality is that it's only real based on my perception. It's not real based on all of our collective perception unless I ask questions, unless I seek to understand. And so really being able to overcome our own stories, our own sense of what is real, of what is true, and really be able to bring much more curiosity to our experience. So I'll just move on in the interest of time, but I really appreciate the interaction and the questions and the perspectives. But we want to make sure that just to give you an opportunity to just reflect for yourself if there's anything that holds you back, what it might be that oftentimes you find as your Achilles heel that prevents you from being able to bring more wisdom and more compassion into your leadership. And just to give you a moment to just think about what that might be. And then to be able to hopefully help you, as we said, to give you a framework to be able to find a way to bring more wisdom and more compassion into your leadership. And Peter, to your point, this is something that you can do not only as an individual, but you can also do it and bring this for your culture and ask yourselves questions about challenges that are organization-wide as opposed to just individually based. And there's 4 steps in a flywheel, and the flywheel concept many of you are familiar with, but the flywheel, the idea is that the first time around the flywheel might be difficult, the second time still might be difficult, but the more that we go through the flywheel, the more easy it gets for the flywheel to turn, and it can turn and spin faster and faster. And so I'll just share with you what each of these steps are in the flywheel, and then we can open it up again for questions. So the first step in the flywheel is really caring presence. This idea that we need to be able to be here now. We need to be able to, as Shannon actually guided us, to be able to be present, to be able to be aware, and also to be open, not only to what our own experience is, but also to be able to really be open to the other person, to let go, as David, you shared, let go of our own stories and to really commit to being able to be curious and fully present in the situation. From that point, the next thing is to really bring courage and a caring courage. And this idea of having courage over comfort. We know that human beings are fundamentally good beings. We don't like to hurt other people, and we also don't like to hurt ourselves. So we don't like to be seen as somebody that says no, or somebody that is doing something that other people might not like or appreciate. And so the second step is to really look at our ability to bring more caring courage into our leadership. The third step is to really look at this idea of caring directness. And this is really a lot about candor and recognizing that direct is faster when we're able to get right to the message as opposed to taking all kinds of different directions. It's not only kinder and easier for us, but it's also kinder and easier for the person that is on the receiving end of that message. The final step in the flywheel is really about transparency. Clarity is kindness. And the transparency, what we're talking about here, and that clarity is not only making sure that we are clear, that we are saying what needs to be said, but it's also about being authentic, opening ourselves up and being vulnerable. And the third aspect of bringing clarity into it is making sure that we're asking questions. We're seeking to understand, we're being curious, because clarity is a two-way street. There's only clarity in the message if what I sent is actually what you heard. And the only way that I'm going to be able to ensure that there is actually clarity is if I ask questions to be able to make sure that we have a common understanding. And what we found in our experience is when we're able to move through this flywheel, we're able to create more trust, we are able to create more psychological safety, and we're able to bring more of that wise compassion into our leadership. But I'll just pause there and again, open it up for people to ask questions and to be able to see whether this flywheel is something that you can see as being helpful in terms of your own leadership, your own experience.
Jacqueline, when I think about this flywheel and how I've experienced it or not over my career, the speed bump for me is number 2, that the courage part. That's the speed bump for me. And in the instances where I've been able to get over that speed bump is looking forward to the number 4, which is to say, if I can just do this, if I can say this in a particular way, I will be doing what is in the best interest, at least in my mind, for this person, or I will be doing what's right. But that speed bump of courage, that's my Achilles heel, is having the courage.
Yeah, Eden, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable, and thank you for sharing. And I think exactly in our experience, what we find is when we can, ask ourselves questions like, how would I want to be treated? What kind of leader do I want to be? Or, what have I experienced when a leader shared with me something that was difficult? That then, how did that make me feel if I could tell that they had that caring courage to be able to deliver it in the most direct and transparent way? But it's good to be aware of our fears, and it's good to be able to look at how to overcome them, how to be able to take that step. Thank you.
Jacqueline, there's some good discussion in the chat about what prevents us from moving successfully through this flywheel. And a couple people are mentioning overwhelmed and fatigue and trying to balance the needs of multiple stakeholders, which I fit into the overwhelm category, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, getting back to the starting point of that caring presence and being here now, it is one of the things that we know, and it's so important, to be able to put our own oxygen mask on first. We need to make sure that we take care of ourselves. And I don't want to, turn this into a session about how we all know that we need to get better sleep. We need to be able to make sure that we're able to manage our own overwhelm, but it is so important for us as leaders to be able to take care of ourselves so that we can be more present, so that we can then engage in these difficult conversations, and we know how hard that is. Thank you for sharing.
Jacqueline, in the few minutes that we have here, I see a lot of really great commentary in the chat room here. For example, Mark talks about continuing through the flywheel, making sure that we move on through steps 3 and 4 as well, not just, stopping at one place within that flywheel. The other thing that I see in the chat too from Peter is, when someone observes us demonstrating compassion to one person, how might they interpret that? These other observers in the system, how might they experience what they see, how they see me working with or treating someone else?
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of things about that is, So one, in our research, we not only had leaders assess themselves in terms of their wise compassion and where they fit into the matrix, we also did ask their direct reports. And it was really interesting to see the difference between how I might see myself as a leader and how my direct reports. And there's two things that we see with that is sometimes there's a mismatch because I'm not actually being as compassionate as I think I am. And sometimes it is because some of the things that I might have to do as a leader do not seem very kind. And even though I'm doing them with a big picture perspective, the whole organization or the whole team, but it can be really challenging. I think, though, that one of the other things that the research shows is how important it is when we show up and we do take courage and we are working as wise and compassionate leaders. Other people do observe that. And one of the things that we know is people say, you know, I could be next. I could be the next one that's in that situation. And so it is so important for us as leaders to recognize that people are watching how we treat other people. And so it is not only so important that we make sure that we're consistent and caring in how we show up, but we've seen that there's tremendous benefits in that, because people, when they see how other people are treated, it's the way that they see what this culture is, what kind of organization this is. And so there can be huge beneficial impacts when we bring this into action.
Maybe we can take the last 2 or 3 minutes here, Jacqueline and Shannon, to field any other questions that the group may have, or to share any strategies and techniques that they've actually employed in their challenges.
I can share a tip that works for me, which is to do with that courageous compassion and this idea that compassion can be fierce. It's not always just tender. And I heard a metaphor about a mother bear looking after their cubs. And when I've done a compassion meditation before, it's always been about putting your hand on your heart. And I heard a really good build on that recently, which is you put a fist on your heart with one hand, and then I'm holding down my mute buttons, so I can't do it now, but you put your fist on your heart with one hand and you cover your fist on the other with your other hand with a hand. So it's like the fierce and the tender. And I've just found that such a useful action to do, to remind me that you can stand up for yourself and you can stand up for others, and that compassion does have that courageous and fierce quality as well as the tender, loving quality.
Kara, thank you so much. I also, an analogy similar, being a warrior of compassion, having both that fierceness, that courage, and also the big heart. Thank you. I love that.
You probably have just a few seconds for maybe one more thought or comment.
Yeah, one thing that I do is I've been having people share their stories on Teams, and what I do is I zoom in and out on particular areas, like values in every story. I cut it out and put it on one slide and have people look at it together, and they find more connection than disconnection when you look at it that way.
Beautiful. Thank you, David.
Peter, were you going to share a thought?
I'm just intrigued by this contrast between this way of being compassionate being something which, for I don't know what proportion, maybe half the population perhaps feels like the right thing to do intrinsically, and is self-rewarding in that way, versus, you know, some of what you're providing here in your research, I think, which is like the rational, unemotional reasons to be, you know, to exhibit these compassionate behaviors, in a sense, out of a different driver of self-interest. But you can be more successful, your organization can be more successful if you learn how to do this, as opposed to you intrinsically are rewarded by being this way.
Seems a little bit like a paradox, right, Peter, for me. But I know in the interest of time, maybe the last comment I'll leave us with is a word that Jacqueline used at the very beginning, which is authentic, right? I mean, we're all going to demonstrate compassion in many different ways. And I think one of the most underlying critical things to be able to do that well is that the behaviors, the outshowing is authentic to us, because people will know when it's not authentic to us. So on that note, I know that we are just a minute over. Thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully this gave you a lot of food for thought. Jacqueline, Shannon, thank you very much for sharing your work and your research. Much appreciated. Take care,
Thank you so
everyone.
much, Eden. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Great, that seemed to go well.
Yep.
So far, so good.
I had all the breakout rooms ready and then we didn't even use them.
Didn't use it. I know.
I think the group size of these meetings has been perfect to not have to go in one. I think everyone was being pretty thoughtful in the comments too in the chat.
Yeah.
Seems like a pretty respectful group with people's time and not talking over each other.
Very good. Rob, quick
Yep.
question. I've had a number of people want to get the recording of the James Ree session from yesterday, the one with math and kindness. I don't know. What is the process with that?
Hold on. Let's see where. So you just want that interview?
Yeah, just that one. It was Peter and James and then
Yeah, I can do that now. Okay,
Okay.
so what I'll do is I'll cut that interview out and then upload it to Dropbox and send you the link.
okay. That's great. I have to get the okay from the Fred people, but it came from them. So I think it'll be.
So just the James interview, that's it.
The part from like 11:30 to 12:30, which was James, Bridget Alkink, and Peter Hurst.
11:30 to 12:30.
Like roughly. I think we were pretty well on schedule last time. So yeah, because they came back from the breakout rooms. So that was the first session. So yeah.
Okay. I'll look at it and then I'll cut it out and then I'll upload it and send it to you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So yeah, while Victoria is on for the cooking, I'll start doing that right now.
Okay, great. And then I'll see you back for the next one after the cooking.
Great.
1 o'clock, right?
No, 11:30.
Oh, 11:30. Sorry, 11:30. Gotcha.
See you soon.
All right.
Thanks, Joy.
Okay. Bye.